Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Pet Portraits in Gouache, Part 1. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and tonight's class is Part 1 in a two-part class that will be continuing next week, same time, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time. So we'll be taking our time with tonight's portrait and finishing it next week. So there's no rush for this process, and also so that we can let our layers dry because we're going to be using a lot of water to begin with. We're going to be using the gouache a lot like watercolor to get started, and so our paper is going to be nice and saturated, and we're going to need to let that dry. So we maybe will not make it more than even halfway today. We'll see how far we can get with our first layers here, and then we'll have an hour and a half next week to complete this portrait. And you are welcome to use any reference photos that you would like if you would like to do a portrait of your own pet or a different pet other than my cat that we'll be using for a reference, or that I will be using as a reference. You are welcome to do that, and I will definitely try to share as many tips and tricks as I can throughout this process of how you can apply what we're doing to your own pet portraits. And feel free to make it your own in any way, and I'll make reminders of that as we go along. But if you attended last week's class where we did pet portrait studies in Artist Loft Graphite, a couple of you did use your own reference photos of, I remember one person did a dog at least, and maybe a couple people painted their dogs. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and review supplies, and we will get started. Okay, so we might have something that looks like this by the end of the class next week. But tonight we're just going to have our first preliminary layers started here. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. You can follow me on Instagram at AD I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art, and here's some of my artwork on my business cards. And you may have seen some of my artwork behind me here in my studio. I've got better internet at my studio, so I'm going to start teaching here again. And those of you who've been with these classes for a long time may remember me teaching here at my studio before, but I've been at home at my desk for a while due to internet issues. Anyway, but I'm having an online sale right now in my online shop where I've got prints and original work for sale. If you'd like to purchase some of my original artwork as a holiday gift, you can check me out on Instagram at ADHodge, or Rich has my link tree that he can drop in the chat, and that's got links to my online shop as well, where I have lots of things marked on sale at the moment. Also have some online, well, at least one online class planned for January. That's an independent class that I'll be teaching on portrait drawing for beginners. So you can check that out. And I will be using Artist Loft watercolor paintbrushes today. And I've got some Artist Loft pencils to do our preliminary sketching on our watercolor paper. And I have already done my sketch on my watercolor paper, but I'll be sketching it again nice and dark for y'all to follow along on some sketchbook paper in just a moment. And I'm using the Artist Loft watercolor pad, 140 pound, 9 by 12 inch paper. And then I've got the Artist Loft jelly gouache here. I've got a couple of water cups. I like to have two of those, one for light and dark colors. If you're near a sink with just one water cup, you can always refresh your water if you need to at some point. I've got some paper towels. I've got some tape, so we're going to tape down our edges so we can get a nice clean edge here. And then I've got an Artist Loft eraser. and a couple of extra items that you maybe don't necessarily need, but are good to have on hand with this jelly gouache is maybe a little pipette or eyedropper or a little spritzer spray bottle, because sometimes um, the jelly gouache can get, I'm just going to open it up here. Sometimes it can get a little dried and cracked, and so it's nice to just spritz it a little bit and get it re-moistened there. I just realized my little spritzer bottle is empty, so I'm filling it up with my water real quick. Okay, so I think that's all the supplies. A lot of supplies for tonight's class. All right, put this back on for now. You also might want some, like a spare plastic palette or two, and I do have just one little plastic palette handy here, but we're not going to be making, actually, we are going to be making some washes. So yeah, it would be good, and I'm pretty sure I put that on the supply list to have a little 10 hole palette there. I might grab a couple more of those for myself in just a moment. Okay, so that is our supplies. I'm going to set all of this aside for a moment so we can do our preliminary sketching. So if you missed last week's class, we just did these little studies of a few different photographs that I provided of my cat. Let me pull those up for us here. My iPad. Okay, so I provided a document that has all of these photos, and you should have a copy of that in the supply list if you're just joining us. And we talked about some different ways that you can crop or zoom in or create focal points in your thumbnail sketches ahead of time to plan for a pet portrait. And that way you could apply what we're doing to your own photographs and not just mine, and following along with this class. I like to make my classes very technique based that can be applied to other subjects as well. So we're zooming in on this particular photo, or that's what I'm going to be doing. You are, like I said, welcome to do one of these other references or your own reference photos. But I'm going to be zooming in on this particular photo of Linda Bagel here. Linda Herbert Bagel, that's her full name. But I want to do another sketch here, just an empty sketch for us to begin to fill in with our paint on our watercolor paper. So I want to set you up to be able to sketch directly on your watercolor paper. So I'm going to demonstrate taping this paper down first, and then on a separate piece of sketchbook paper, so I've got my Artist Loft sketchbook pad here, I'm going to draw this again with a really dark pencil so that it will show up on Zoom, and that will help you get your preliminary sketch down on your watercolor paper. But I want you to draw super light. I don't want you to draw as dark as I'm going to draw on my sketchbook paper. I'm just doing that so it will show up on the Zoom. So the first thing we want to do is tape our paper down. And if you've got loose watercolor paper, then you can do this little trick. I'm going to demonstrate on my completed one here. And if you've got the watercolor block like I do, then you can do it exactly like I'm going to do it. But if you've got a loose sheet of watercolor paper, because I know not everybody's going to have the exact same supplies as me, you can do this. You can take your tape and you can hover half on and half off the paper, and you're going to get your tape lined up even at either end so that it's nice and straight. And you're just going to look at the paper, and you can use a ruler if you don't like doing it this way and you want it to be exact. But I find that I can get it pretty straight just by eyeballing it and hovering it using the tape as a measurement. So I'm going half over the tape and I can see through the tape, and then I'm taping it down so that it's half on and half off. But I've got this paper that's on a block, so I don't need to tape it down to my table surface. I'm just going to line it up directly with the edge of the paper. And since it's on a block, I really don't need to tape it down to keep the paper from buckling. Pretty much the only reason I'm doing it with it on the block is because it looks nice when we peel it off. We get a little nice clean edge all the way around our image, and it gives it, just elevates it a little bit, gives it some margins. And I already did my drawing, like I said, but you're just taping it down first. I might have to adjust my drawing slightly to get it to be within the parameters of the tape. I'm just doing that at the top now. And so if you've got a block, then your margins might be a little wider like mine, because we're just using the width of the tape as our margin. There, and just lining it up right with the edge of the paper. Doing the same thing on all four sides. Okay. All right, so I'm going to be doing something a little different since I already sketched mine. So I'm going to set mine aside, but you might want to go ahead and sketch yours directly on your watercolor paper, unless your drawing skills are a little shaky and you didn't attend last week's class and this is your first time sketching a pet or this image. Then you might want to do this sketch on some sketchbook paper as well, and maybe warm up a little bit before you go to the watercolor paper. And this class will be on YouTube tomorrow, so you can always go back and pause, rewind, fast forward, etc. Okay, so I'm just looking for I pulled out my H pencil to do that sketch, but I need a nice dark pencil for y'all right now. So I've got my 8B here, just so that my drawing will show up. And we talked about this last week, how even though this photo shows the cat in 3/4 view, we're kind of turning the face slightly to make it straight on. So we're just kind of ignoring that 3/4 view a little bit and doing more of a head-on view of the cat. So I am going to start up here with the ears, and I'm going to use the negative space at the top of the paper to create this nice little half crescent shape here. So we're looking for a half crescent shape, and it goes up a little higher here, but we're going real general to specific, so we can adjust these things as we go. And we're not filling in this sketch, we're keeping it, I don't know if this is showing up. It might show up here on the live Zoom, but sometimes when I watch the playbacks, if I've drawn really light lines, they don't always show up on the recording. But I'm gonna hold it up nice and close to the camera. We just want it empty. We just want an empty value shapes where all our value is going to go. So we're not filling any of this in with our pencil right now. Unless there might be some of you, sometimes in these painting classes, we have folks who are just drawing, and maybe you are filling in the value, the light and dark shadows with your pencils. Okay, and then I'm going to look at the coloring, the patches of color on Linda's hair here. And if you're drawing your own pet, I suggest you do the same. You start to look for the outlines of the coloring that you're seeing and just the texture of the hair that might be sticking out. So we're just looking for a nice light line. If you're on the watercolor paper, just like a nice little light zigzag line right there to indicate where that shift from light to dark fur is happening. Okay, and then I'm going to jump down here to the sides of the head. I want to make sure that I get this width of the side of the heads correct. And I want to make sure that they go all the way to the edge of the frame, or almost to the edge of the frame. So give ourselves a lot of space for the head and really zoom in here. And then we talked about the particular proportions of Linda's face last week and how capturing likeness in a pet is so essential. People get so attached to their pets, and we recognize our pets by their specific proportions. So her face is nice and squished, like a little smashed cheeseburger here. So we want to make sure that the chin is pretty high up here. So you may have to adjust this. I had to, even when I was sketching it just now, had to draw it a couple of times where the chin goes, but we're looking for this heart shape to the head, and I'm leaving it open because this is going to be so light. So I wouldn't draw a dark line here. Just a vague indication of where the bottom of the cheeks are, but they're nice and low down by the chin, so not too high up there. I'm actually going to use my kneaded eraser here because it's handy. Whatever eraser you want to use that you have on hand is fine. So we're looking for that squished little heart shape here. And then this line over here is indicating this shift from dark to light fur on this side. So we're sketching the coloring of the fur, not so much hard outlines around Linda, because she is mostly a white cat, so she's very light, and we don't want to have hard lines. And then we want our pencil lines to not be showing later, and they should be easily covered up by this gouache since it is so opaque. But you know, make sure you're sketching nice and light if you're on the watercolor paper. And then she has this Batman mask, as I kept describing it last week, with a little flame that goes up the center of her nose, but the flame is shifted a little more to the left. So, and if these things are not exact in your drawing and painting, that's fine, because I'm looking at my painting and realizing I made it go straight up here in the painting, and it still looks pretty good. Okay, and so I'm just looking at the shape of that darker coloring around her eyes that feels like a Batman mask, and noticing how low down that comes in relationship to where the nose is going to go. And then it seems to kind of flap out over here because this is the, you know, we've got this 3/4 view where we're seeing. So we are putting the 3/4 view in there, in that we're seeing more, a little more of this side of her head than this side of her head. Or at least we're not seeing this side of the fur on this side of her body. Or on this side, we're seeing it on this side. Anyway, so light line for that background white and light lines over here. So we just want to understand where that edge is, but we want that edge to be nice and light over here. And then I'm going to draw it kind of dark, but I want you to draw it really light. This same thing over here. We want this to be real wispy on this side. And I suggest we get all of the fur around the neck positioning correct before we do the cheeks, because that's going to help us to see how much negative space we might have between the bottom of the page where our tape is. And we might need to make some adjustments here around the face. So if we keep adjusting the face and don't do this first, we might have to redraw that a few times. So whereas we can just add a little extra neck fur here if we need to. So I'm erasing the chin again because I'm looking and I still think I maybe made it a little lower than it needs to be. I'm going to get the nose in there first. So we're looking for another little heart-shaped nose. You can start with a triangle first, but it's a very soft triangle. So it curves down. And then we're looking for this shape on either side of the nose. I'm trying to think of a way to describe that shape. I'm thinking like a coat hanger, like an upside down coat hanger shape. And then there's a little cleft at the bottom of the nose. We want to make sure we get that in there. And then this is what I'm talking about, this area right here. It'd be really easy to make this much longer than it needs to be. So I'm going to use the distance from the nose to the little downturned frowny shape of the mouth to help measure where that chin actually needs to go. So it's a little higher than I originally drew it. And then from there, I can see where that rounded bottom of the cheek needs to be. And if I went too fast for you, know that you have the YouTube recording to look forward to tomorrow where you can pause it and slow down. And then we are looking for some upside down little, I don't know why they would be upside down, but some crescent shapes for the eyes. And they are angling up towards the ears. And then I'm just noticing how it's a little lighter around the eyes. So getting the shape of that fur in there again. And we're looking for some irregular little texture, the indication of where those light patches are. And if you're drawing your own pet, I suggest you do the same. You look for those patches of fur rather than hard outlines, because that is essentially what we are painting here. We're painting a bunch of fur. Linda is a very long-haired ragdoll cat. So we got a lot of fur here. And even if you're painting a short-haired animal, you still want to look for that texture in the fur is what's gonna make it convincing as a pet portrait here. So we're looking for that texture right off the bat. And we're also giving ourselves a little bit of a paint by numbers situation for the different colors that we're going to be mixing up in our palette to prepare for this. So we're going to try to mix a couple of different creamy light browns and ochre color over here. We're going to get as close as we can. Be a gray, a pale gray, a couple of different grays. We're going to use pink. We're going to go a little bit off script as far as the colors on Linda's fur. And I'll encourage you to get as close as you can if you're painting your own pet as well. I think there is always room for interpretation when it comes to art, and we don't always have to match colors exactly, especially in a class like this, where we don't have all of the time in the world. Even though we do have a lot of time to match those colors, we're going to just get as close as we can. Okay, so we got a little bit of an angry cat situation. She's a very sweet cat, but she does look kind of mad and with her eyes closed and her little downturned mouth. So yeah, I think that's all we need here. And if you want to give yourself a little more details, like we talked about last week, these contours and the directional shift that's happening, that's something that I'm definitely going to mention while we're painting. but I hesitate to have us draw too much on here because I don't want you to end up drawing so much that you get so attached to your drawing and you don't want to paint over it. I think just the vague idea of where all of our different colors are going to go is enough. And we don't need to draw the whiskers because those are going to be added with our white paint at the end. So that is all we need for our sketch here. Are there any questions about the sketch before I move on? Okay, I don't think so.
No questions yet.
Okay, I am going to just grab a couple more plastic palettes for myself. I will be right back. All right, just kidding. I'm going to be a little fancier tonight because I realized I left all my plastic palettes in the car. One thing about switching to working from the studio again is it didn't bring anything, so I'm going to use these ink wells that I use for my ink here at the studio instead so that we can start to make these washes. But the little plastic palettes with the 10 wells inside will work fine, or they also sell these at Michael's, are really handy containers for making washes. I know it sounds like I'm saying the tongue twister. We make washes of gouache now. Okay, so you might want to prepare your palette uh, with me now. I do suggest that we do that now instead of as we go. And if you are painting your own pet, then your colors might be a little different. I always think it's nice to even have a spare sheet of paper, and you can do this directly in your on your sketchbook paper. It doesn't have to be watercolor paper, but maybe a spare set of watercolor paper. We're going to paint some little swatches of our colors as we get started here, and I'm just going to prepare them ahead of time. And I think that is always a good idea to do because then we don't have to figure it out as we go and we're ready to go all along. Okay, so like I said before, Linda is a very white cat, but we do have maybe 3 or 4 different browns here that we're going to use. And then we're going to use an ochre color instead of perfectly matching this color over here on the side. So it feels a little golden to me over here. And I just to create some variation, we're going to use that ochre color, and maybe you don't quite see it as that color. You're welcome to use just all browns, but I think it just gives her fur a little more dimension. And also I'm going to use it as the base color for where these lighter browns are going to go as well. And I happen to have that exact color here in my jelly gouache set, that ochre color. So I gotta be careful or I'm gonna get some gouache on that lovely completed one there. Okay, so this is where I need to spritz my gouache. I tried to get it nice and moistened earlier, but it really got soaked in there already. You also want to choose your background color early on here. I'm going to use pink again, but you might want to use a different color. So first off, we're going to water this down. So I'm taking this color right here and I'm just smashing my paintbrush into it with some water. and getting some of that color out of there. And we're going to treat the gouache like watercolor. We're using the fat over lean rule here, which means we're going to keep it nice and thin in the early stages. And then we're going to go thicker as we get into the later stages. And the reason to do that is control. We're going to be able to control what we're doing a lot more. And this is where I'm just going to take my pipette and just fill up my little well here with water. And we're really watering down this color. We're making a little puddle of this color. You probably don't need this much. Definitely made a lot of it. All right, so that's good for that color. And then I'm just going to paint the bottom of my cup to get that off of my paintbrush. And I'm just using the same medium round brush here. I'll try to mention what paintbrush I'm using as we get started painting as well. I've got several round brushes, and I also have some nice thin brushes as well for these individual whiskers and detail moments like that as well. Okay, so we've got that color prepared, and now we want a couple of different browns. One of the browns, this medium dark brown here, I actually have the list of the color names. Grab that. Okay, so that was the medium yellow that I just used, and then now I'm using the earth yellow. This set really does have a lot of the colors we need already in here. We're only going to have to make a few colors here. So the next one is this deep red. They're organized differently on the paper as opposed to how they look on the palette. I'm gonna call that the deep red. It's kind of a canyon red, as I might describe it. And I'm just gonna fill up my well again with some water. And then get that deep red or this reddish brown moist, and then make a little wash of that color. Set that aside. I'm going to set it aside. If you've got a little plastic well, then we're just going to have them all right there. And then we've got some black on her fur, but I'm just going to use dark brown for where the black is going to go, because we're going to keep it nice and thin and washy here in the beginning. And I suggest if you're making your own colors for a different pet, for your own pet, that you do the same sort of thing I'm doing here, where you just get close enough and try to find at least 3 or 4 colors in your pet's fur, and try to get them to feel as natural as possible, as close to the actual color, without driving yourself nuts trying to match them perfectly. Okay, so we have a wash of our dark brown. And then we need a gray. I'm just looking at the number of wells that I have here. I'm going to do gray and then pink, and that'll be good to get us started. We do need a light brown too, but I'm going to transform my dark brown to light brown by adding some white to it in just a moment. Okay, so for the gray, we can start with our water again. I'm thinking back to when we painted the king trumpet mushrooms, if y'all joined me for that class in gouache, it was a lot of the same colors on a mushroom as Linda Bagel. So full earth tones and then gray. Okay, so that's my black for sure. Probably should have started with my white.
Adrian, we have a question from Sally. She's wondering what colors would you suggest for variations in a solid black cat's fur?
Oh, good question. Okay, so on a solid black cat, you're gonna be seeing some reflective light. So the light around the room might likely be reflected in the fur, and you might be seeing blue or purple or maybe more gray and white where the light is hitting more directly. So try to look for some other colors like that reflected in the fur. And if it's an older black cat, I had a black cat that was 17 years old when she passed away. You know, they start to get little gray hairs, so you might look for some gray in there as well. Could be showing up, you know, just anything like that, because I know from all those years of having a black cat, uh, or if you have a black dog, same thing. When you try to photograph them, they just disappear. It's like you just see eyes. So the more you can get them, I talked about this last week, I think a little bit, the more you can photograph them in the light, the better, or next to something that is highly contrasting. So if in the photo they're just all washed out black, maybe try to change the contrast on the photo a little bit to highlight some of the areas of light that you're seeing, and then you can change those to maybe some different colors that you're seeing in the photograph, like blue or purple or gray or white. Hope that's helpful. Okay, so I just added some white to my black little puddle of water there, and so I got some gray going, and we can lighten that as we go. And then the last color is our background color. And putting all those washes next to each other because they look aesthetic. I'm trying to decide if I want to do a color other than pink. I'm going to stick to pink because I like how the pink brings out the pink in the nose and the little bit of pink that we're going to put on the mouth there. But always encourage y'all to use your own creative license here on these backgrounds if you want to do a different color than me. So I'm just using my clean water once again to fill up a little puddle here. And this time I am going to start with white. I got distracted last time and started with the black. You always want to start with the lighter color first. So I'm going to start with white. And then I'm going to just add a touch of red to this to make it pink. And I might have a little bit different pink than the pink I used on the last example there. I'm just touching my red a little bit. A nice little Pepto-Bismol pink to happen. You can make it a little darker if you want. I'm going to go a little darker. Maybe a little darker again. I'm looking at my other one. I'm like, hey, it doesn't have to be that light. Okay. All right. What a lovely set of colors. Can't quite get my pink in the frame though on screen, but that's fine. And I gotta move this one so I can start painting here. Okay, so it's a good idea to start from the background and work your way forward. So I'm going to start with that pink background. And the reason for that is that we can always go back and make touch-ups later it'll be hard if we paint the cat first to paint the background in between these little moments of fur, right? So it's easier to paint the background first, then we'll add some washes to the cat, then we'll do our last layers on the background, then we'll start on our last layers on the cat. And gouache is such a fun medium because we can use it super thick like this, and it almost can imitate oil paint in the way that it's so thick when it's going on wet, but it dries very matte. So it has this matte quality to it, and it's not going to be glossy. It's going to look glossy when it is going on when it's wet. There's a couple of different things you want to keep in mind about gouache as we paint with it. One, it the values, the dark and light, dry very unusually. So the lighter values will dry darker, and the darker values will dry lighter. And that might hurt your brain a little bit. And you might think, how am I going to keep track of that? And there is one simple rule that will keep you from needing to calculate and think ahead and figure out what's happening. And it's this: don't do anything until it dries. We're going to paint a layer and then we're going to let it dry. Okay. And then we'll see what it looks like dry. And then that's how we'll know what we need to do next. So as we get into these uh, last layers, we might put on like this gray right here and it might look really dark, but then it's going to dry lighter. Or we might put on this really dark layer on the mask and think, oh, that's too dark, but then we're going to let it dry and we'll see it dry differently. So the main rule is just wait for it to dry before you do anything. I actually just finished a 6-week long in-person gouache class today, which was a lot of fun. I love painting with gouache. Okay, so I am going to take a nice big round brush. You could also use a flat brush for this. And I am going to just paint everywhere that's going to be the back. Whoa, hang on. That paintbrush was not totally clean. I'm going to start to paint everywhere that this pink is going to go with just water. So I'm just going to paint it with water. We're going to be doing a wet on wet technique here, and it's not that much background, so you don't necessarily have to do this wet on wet thing, but I like to use it when I'm covering kind of a big area all at once. Although, yeah, it's really not that big, and I actually left even less of the background around the fur showing in this one than in the other one. So I guess it depends on your painting, how much of your background is even going to be there. Right, and then I'll just start to drop that pink in there. So really starting out like watercolor. You can paint thick right from the start with gouache. The reason I don't recommend doing that, especially for beginners, is because you just have less control over your layers. This puts us in the driver's seat with the gouache, and we can really manipulate what we're doing a lot more easily if we start out thin. And in the in-person gouache class that I just finished, I actually just finished 2 sessions of it. One that started in early fall, and then one that started around Halloween. And in both of those classes, I had at least one person who loved to go thick from the start with the gouache, and I had to convince them why it was a good idea to start thin. So with one of our exercises, I had us all do it both ways. I said, we're going to do 2 different versions of this. One, we're going to paint thick from the start, and the other one, we're going to paint thin from the start. just so that I could convince those two people in the class why it was good to start out thin. And then I asked at the end of that exercise, which one did you like better? And some people did like the ones where they painted thick better, but they all agreed they had more control over what they were doing going thin first. So if you've painted with gouache before and you're really comfortable with it, and you're like, I don't need to do this, I can go ahead and just make this background super thick and I can go as thick as I want. I'm not the boss of you. You do whatever you want. But for the beginners, this is going to help us have a lot more control over this medium, especially if it's your first time using it. Okay, so while that's drying, because that's super wet for me, I'm going to look at the innermost areas of the fur coloring. So if you're painting a pet other than Linda right now, then look at your photograph and decide what's not touching the background, basically. We just don't want to touch the background right now because it'll bleed. So I'm going to look at, let's see, this light brown around the eyes and that ochre color that we're seeing there, and then pink around the nose and the mouth. In fact, let's go ahead and do that pink right now while we've got it on our brush. And do just a really light pink on the nose. And if you go too thick right here or too dark, I mean, that's the beauty of the gouache being so opaque. We can easily uh, go back over that and do another layer of white and lighten it up. I'm just pulling some of that out of there. It was a little wet for me. And then I'm seeing kind of, we're going to make a purplish gray color. That's what I'm seeing around the mouth. But for now, we're just going to do pink around the mouth as a base color. It's always good to just get a little bit of paint all over your painting to start and break the ice and start to build up your layers. And look at the color that is underneath that's informing the color on top. So pink will inform a purplish gray very nicely there. And I'm still just on that same round paintbrush. Maybe let me switch to a smaller round brush here. Actually, I still want a pretty big medium round. And I'm going to use that ochre color now. Because again, we're looking at the color that's underneath, that's informing the color on top. And this can easily be covered up with more opaque layers. So I might just go ahead and paint this all around this lighter area around the eyes. That's how I did it before. So why not just go ahead and do it again? And if you can tell your background is pretty dry, like I can tell that pink is dry enough right there. I can also just leave a little bit of a gap so that I don't touch it. I'm just going to do a really thin layer of that. What was it called? Medium yellow. I keep calling it ochre. And then I'm going to bleed that what is labeled ochre on the, I just realized I was calling that deep red, but it actually, this is the ochre, is the one that's right above the earth yellow on the palette. This one. Oh no, wait, that is my light brown that we made. Sorry, I'm getting confused. What was the deep red color? the reddish one, y'all. I'm going to bleed that into it, and I'm going to start to notice these little whiskery shapes. But again, we're just keeping it nice and light. Just noticing the variation in the color. And even though these aren't the exact colors that it's going to end up, it's a base layer that's going to inform the layer that goes on top. Those of you who maybe play around with makeup might already know this. That's something that I've only recently learned about makeup. It's that you can put a color underneath that will make your eyeshadow kind of pop in a different way, even if you're going to cover that color up. All right, so I'm kind of switching between that reddish color and the brownish color, and I'm really just creating some variation in the color of the fur, making it look nice and natural, letting these colors bleed together, and just indicating that it's lighter around the eyes. And it's also just giving the cat's fur some dimension so that it doesn't feel flat. And eventually we're going to add some pretty dark black. We're going to always mix some brown with the black so it has some dimension to it as well. So everywhere where the black was going, that's where I said we're going to do this dark brown. So it's pretty dark from the ears. We're just breaking the ice. Oops. It's good to break the ice and get a little bit of color everywhere on your painting as soon as possible. And gouache is really a great, I keep saying how great gouache is, but especially for pet portraits because we can get that white for the whiskers. And if you've got a white pet like Linda, that can be hard to render with watercolor because you would have to leave all of the paper blank traditionally, do a traditional watercolor. And here we don't have to do that because we can add all that white on top with our white gouache, and we can get all that fur to stand out nice and opaque with this white gouache. Okay, probably should have left a little bit of room for the gray, but could easily add some gray in where the brown has been going. And it's kind of your choice if you want to use that yellowish medium yellow color, or maybe the gray, or maybe even a mixture of the two of them here where the fur fades out and feels a little golden right here. And I'm not worried about any of these little overlapping moments right now because all of this is going to get covered up with our thick paint. So we don't need to worry about blending anything perfectly right now. As long as it's thin, we're going to be able to easily cover anything up that we're doing right now. And then just because her fur, can look a little dirty in some spots, and a lot of pets' fur can look that way. I think that's the other reason I was seeing this yellowish color. So yeah, just a mixture of this yellowish color and gray down here where there's some the light is hitting the fur in some places and feeling not completely white, a little off-white. We're just giving it some color dimension down here. So a little bit of gray, a little bit of that yellowish color, maybe mixing the two of them together a tiny bit. Just adding a little gray to the medium yellow and vice versa. Turn it both ways to see which one looks better. And you can put that honestly in a lot of different places, like here at the edge of the Batman mask. All those places where we just have that transitional moment from light to dark. We don't want it to be too stark. Just breaking the ice everywhere. Do gray up here on the inside of the ear. That's visible. Up here. In this area. The other reason to put a little bit of color even in places where the white is going, like I'm going to water down this gray even more and add a little more white to it, is because we need the white to show up against something. So if we have a base color underneath, then the white will actually show up. Otherwise, the white's just going to be white on the white paper and it doesn't have the same effect. So we need something there. I'm just making a much lighter gray wash. Just adding a bunch of white to my already gray wash. And then now I've got a light gray wash. And I can put that in a lot of different spots. Oops. So like in the nose is a good spot where we want to have, boy, that's still a really dark gray. Maybe I'll just add some water to bleed that around. Just want a little base layer. On the cheeks. I'm using a little circular motion here. Honestly, you cannot mess it up at this stage as long as you're keeping it thin. The only way you could mess it up at this stage is if you were going super thick with your paint and using a color other than what you wanted. Or as long as it's thin, we're just getting a little bit of paint everywhere on the cat. Right. And then once we get our first layer of the cat done, our background should be totally dry. If you are near a sink, or you need, if you're like me and you need to reuse your well, you might pour this out. I'm just going to use my paper towel to soak that up and then make a thicker. I might not even need, well, no, I am going to use the well again so that I can, because we got to make this paint. So now I'm going to take my white a lot thicker. Oops, I just splattered some. So we're still getting it fluid and moving here, but we're not making a puddle of it.
Adrian, Raquel has a question. She said, her dog has salt and pepper hair and some spots. How do you recommend that she do the bottom layer, black or white?
I would do a really thin wash of black, but keep it really thin, like where the white is. Like I kept grabbing my paper towel and pulling it out in spots where I know it's going to end up super light. So I would just do like a really light gray wash or watered down black wash, and then pull it out with the paper towel where the white is going to go, but just to give it something there for the white to stand out against. I hope that's helpful. I love that so many of you are doing your own pets. I'm so excited about these. This is always, just as a teacher of these classes, I try to inspire originality and creativity as much as possible. Not to say that I'm, prefer that over those of you who are painting along with me. I'm excited to see your portraits of Linda as well, but I'm excited for those of you painting your own pets too. Okay, so just making this pink again. Oops, I really splattered some white on there where I didn't mean to. I'm gonna lift that out before it dries. Or maybe that's just a, I think that's just a white spot. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I want to make this pink background. We're making it thicker this time. And you could do a second layer that's still thinner than this. I just want this to be my final layer. And you could kind of build your way up to thicker paint, like start one level in between a wash and this. But I'm going to go ahead and just get this last layer on here, and you want to make a pretty good amount of it, to fill your background. So I'm worried that might not be enough, because if you have to make more of it halfway through, it might not be the exact same color. And that actually did happen to me with this background. I don't know how noticeable it is, but see, there's a slightly darker pink right here. So it's not a huge deal, but if you run out of your pink halfway through, you might have to make another one, and it might be slightly a different color. I think that's what happened there, or I might have had to do some touch-ups. But in any case, it's difficult sometimes to match that color perfectly, especially because it dries a little lighter and darker than how it looks wet. So it's kind of hard to gauge when it's wet, which is why I just left it like that and hoped for the best, I guess. I don't think it's too noticeable. It's definitely, I think, unless I pointed it out, I bet a lot of y'all didn't notice that. Okay. But now it's all I see when I look at that. Anyway. Okay. I think this is enough with this pink color. Right. I'm just gonna quickly cover my background with my nice thick pink. And I am looking at my photo reference as I do this so that I can see there's like a little bump up here on her head. I'm gonna make sure I get that little bump in there. I can always add that, but I can always, like I said, we can always paint over the background a little bit if the fur needs to be adjusted as we go, but trying to touch up the background is trickier later in the process. So it's good to get it out of the way. Although the more I think about it, maybe that's why my pink is a little off. Maybe I had to do a touch up later on in the process. I honestly don't remember. But in any case, it's good to do the background first. Always good to paint your way from the background forward so you don't paint yourself into a corner where you have to paint a background in between fur. But it is a little confusing with a white cat here, knowing where the fur stops and the background starts in this photo. I think it's a little easier if you zoom out on that photo if you're painting this one, because then you can see where the table edge is a little clearer. I knew that was going to happen. There's stuff underneath my desk, and I was telling myself earlier not to kick it. I can't help but think about the other reason I wanted to come to the studio tonight is because our star here loves to disrupt my classes, especially when I'm painting. She knows exactly what she's doing. Trying to climb on my desk while I'm painting and teaching. All right. Yeah, this is a confusing moment right here on fur in the background, knowing where to go here. But I'm gonna go ahead and do those little wispy moments now, because it will be easier to paint over this with the fur later, even though it seems like it won't be, because it's so thick. The white is the most opaque color. All right. And now our background is nice and done. Although I added, that is why you don't want to go thin over fat. I accidentally added some water up there when I did a little touch up to that moment. And since it was so wet and thick, I pulled it out a little bit. But I'm just going to wait for that to dry. And if you did something like that yourself, it's easier to wait for that to dry, and then I will just have to do another layer on the background, which is easy. I'll just mix up another pink probably next week and touch that up rather than trying to fix it right now. I'll just probably make it worse. But I just have like a little moment right there where I accidentally made a puddle. Okay, so this is the part of the class where I always joke in my in-person classes to people. I say, let me know if you need something to do while you're waiting for your layers to dry, because we need to let these layers dry. Although when I'm touching it, it feels mostly dry, like it's not coming off on my hand, but it would be better if it was a little more dry than it is now. And the way I can tell that it's still too wet is the paper is bubbled. So if your paper is bubbled, definitely if it's still shiny, it's obviously still wet. But if the paper is bubbling or it's cold when you touch it, just give it a couple more minutes to dry before we do these next layers, because there's just no point in rushing it, and you're more likely to do things that you regret when you don't wait for layers of gouache to dry. So I know it can be a little frustrating, especially in a class like this, to just like hang out for a moment, but I'm going to switch to my forward facing view. I think we're just making such good time. I was kind of expecting us to maybe end around here, and then because as we get into the thicker layers, they're going to dry a little faster. So are there any questions that I can answer? I see Tina has a question. Let's see. Let's scroll down here. What will you do with yours while we wait? What will I do with mine when it's finished, or what will I do right now while we wait? I'm just gonna hang out for a minute and see if y'all have any questions I can answer while we wait for it to dry. Oh, because I have two of these portraits. I don't know. What should I do with my portrait, my two portraits of my cat? Maybe my daughter wants to hang one up in her bedroom. She's obsessed with our cat, so I bet she would want to hang one up. Could always put one in my online shop if anybody wants to buy a portrait of my cat. Um, oh, the Austin Cat Lounge. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe I could donate it to the Austin Cat Lounge, see if they want to hang up a portrait of a cat. That's a great idea, Tina. Thank you. Are there any other questions that I can answer while we hang out for a minute and wait for our layers to dry? Let me see. I'm just thinking, what is the center of the cat face called? Who knows the answer to that? What is that called? That is called something. I can tell Rich is gonna look it up. He's on the case. uh, Anybody want to hold up their portraits right now and we can see, maybe we can do a little preview of how they're looking so far a little early? Or if you're having any issues, or I could help with color mixing. I love those questions about other colors of fur that I could help mix. Oh, Barbara's holding hers up. Let me spotlight you, Barbara. Oh, yes, that's looking great. Oh, I love how you're really capturing that variation in color in the fur in that early stage there. Rich says the muzzle. That sounds right to me. Anybody else want to hold theirs up for now? Great work so far, Barbara. Oh, here's Sharon. Oh, wow. Yeah, we're going for a little abstracted color there. That's really fun. All the purples and yellows and oranges. All right, and this is Raquel. Oh, Raquel, I'm excited to see. Oh, this is the salt and pepper dog, huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, I love the yellow background. That's looking nice. Yeah, nice thin wash for those. Yeah, and the gouache is really great for all those like little patches of white fur that we're gonna add on top of the black there in your photograph. All right, this is Nancy. Oh, that's looking really nice, Nancy. Yeah. I love how you're blending those colors together so far. And this is Brenda. Oh, hang on, I've got my windows blocking there. Oh, yeah, yeah. That's looking really great so far. Nice just gesture and weight to the dog. Really feeling the personality coming across so far too. Right. I think that's everyone who is holding one up right now. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and switch back to my tabletop view. I think I'm probably dry enough to get back to it. We got about 10-ish minutes, a little more than 10 minutes here
We have another
to
quick
keep.
question from
Oh,
Sharon. She's wondering, can you use a hair dryer to speed up the drying process?
yes, you definitely can. I just do not have my hair dryer handy here at the studio. Also, sometimes I feel like it's more trouble than it's worth. To by the time I get it all set up and then doing it on Zoom, it can just be a little obnoxious. We just need to wait a few minutes here. Um, okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is just start going in with thicker paint and more realistic color that we're seeing here. So we can actually just add to these washes. These beer washes are kind of small. I'm going to soak up a little bit of my brown, and then I'm just going to add some white to it. Try to utilize what I already have here and make this nice creamy light brown that I'm seeing so much of in Linda's fur. So I'm just taking that brown and adding a bunch of white. White is definitely the color in this gouache set that I use the most. And that seems to happen in a lot of paint sets as you use it so much for mixing. So I've got two whites in this jelly gouache set. I love this jelly gouache set by Artist Loft. I've been using it for a lot of classes. Okay, so that gave me what feels more like a grayish brown so far. So I'm going to add a little more of these two browns to it, the ochre color and the burnt umber. Now that I'm looking at how they're actually labeled correctly. And it might take a little trial and error. Like that is way too dark. I also probably could have been doing this instead of chatting because I've been mixing up my colors. But I'll admit it's still a little wet, so we needed a couple of extra minutes there regardless. And I don't mind spending a couple of minutes doing that in a class. Honestly, I like to be dramatic about letting things dry because I'm afraid if I'm not, people will just power through when it's still wet. And maybe even if somebody's watching later on YouTube, they'll still slow down. Because I would say the main issues that people run into with all water mediums is just not letting them dry. 90% of the issues come from powering through when everything is still wet and getting frustrated and then just trying to fix everything, and then an issue happens and you try to fix it and another issue happens and you try to fix it. Meanwhile, you've never stopped to wait for that layer to dry. But if you just pause when an issue happens and just let that dry, it's going to be so much easier to paint over it because you have so much more control when the layers are dry. Okay, so I'm looking for this light creamy brown, and I think I'm there. Sometimes I think it's easier to make my own brown than to work with the browns that are in a set like this. I might add a little bit of this medium yellow to it and see what that does. There we go. All right. Another way you could get here if you didn't have these browns in your set is to mix your red and your green together until you get a brown and then add white to that. Okay, so I'm not going as thick as I'm going to be in our last layers here, so it's still a little watery, but it's not a wash. So it's not a puddle anymore, it's a little thicker. And now I'm looking at all those areas of Linda's fur that are just a little lighter. Again, we're painting from the background forward. Oh, that's still darker than I want it to be. This is why it's good to paint swatches. I know I said we were going to do that, and then I just started going for it because I was looking at the time. If I paint a little swatch of this color off to the side, I can get a good sense of how it's going to look on the paper. Sometimes it just looks so different on the palette than it does on the paper. We can always paint over this when it's dry. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. And I'm just using a little hatching brush stroke. So another thing about gouache that makes it really easy to work with is to think about how you might draw with a paintbrush. So, and I've talked about this in other gouache classes as well, and Rich included a link to some previous classes that we've had using gouache. We had an intro 101 class last year. Gouache Painting 101, I think was the title in January of last year. And in that class, I talked about drawing techniques, and we did a lot of different brush strokes with the gouache. And the drawing techniques are hatching, cross hatching, stippling, and scribbling that you might use with a pen. And when you approach painting with gouache in that way, so think more about one line at a time or one little mark at a time with your paintbrush, it's actually a lot easier to control than if you were to continue to move your paintbrush around in that area. So as I'm painting these areas of fur, I'm just going 1, 2, 3, like I'm filling up that area with little flicks of my paintbrush one at a time, in as opposed to moving my paintbrush all around, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So,
Jennifer's asking, what size and type of brush are you using again?
oh, I've still got that medium round. I've been sticking to a medium round for most of the class here, although I did use a smaller round brush a little earlier. But yeah, it is size, let's see, size 9 of the Artist Loft watercolor paintbrushes. So all of this lighter fur area, I'm just going with the direction of the fur. And thinking about hatching marks. And I'm already seeing a difference in the color or the value of the color as it's drying. So keep that in mind, that it looks much different wet versus dry. And just getting a next layer on there that's a little thicker than the first layer, but still not as thick as we plan to go in our last layers. And I'm just noticing everywhere where I'm seeing I feel like I might want this lighter brown. The lighter areas of the coloring. And I'm switching my directions of how I'm adding those brush strokes based on the direction of the flow of the hair. And I'm trying not to paint in the same spot where it's wet too much. So I'm moving around to dry areas. Okay, I think I'm ready to switch to that darker color now. So I might just continue to use this area of my palette here, and I'm going to make a brownish black. So I'm mixing my brown and my black together. My burnt umber and my black. And I'm adding a little bit of water to that because I don't want it to be super thick. I might even let some of that lighter brown bleed into it a little bit, just because those colors are getting mixed on my palette together. Okay, so this is a little thick, but since this is our darkest color, I think it's okay to go ahead and go a little thicker with this one. Although it might look thicker on the zoom than it actually is. I still did thin it out quite a bit. And I can still see through it a little bit, so it's not the thickest possible paint. So we can still do another layer on top of this next time. And ideally you would wait for that other layer to dry or try to go in places again where it is dry, because if you go too much into that wet paint right now, it's going to bleed together and get a little muddy. So I'm trying to go in between and around that area that I just painted. Oh, I just noticed the time. I'm going to do just this one little area of the ear over here. And then that'll be a good place to stop. I might even water that down a little bit and spread that around. Keep it a little more thin since we're about to have to stop for the night. But we definitely made it farther than I expected us to in this first class. I'm just keeping it kind of thin, but using that darker version of that color. So we will pick up with this area next time. It's kind of an awkward spot to stop for me. And if you're at the same spot, maybe we'll water this down a little bit and just blend it out a tiny bit into these spots. I think it's okay if we go a minute or two over here. Yeah, we're ending in a teenager phase. I like to say every painting goes through a teenager phase where it looks a little awkward and then it all comes together in the end. So just have to trust the process. We're ending on a teenager moment here. Okay, I'm getting away from her coloring because I'm just filling stuff in now. Well, no, it does get that dark over there. That's fine. Okay, that is a good place to stop. And we did already hold up our paintings, but if there's anybody else real quick before we end here, if anybody else wants to hold up their paintings that didn't share already, I think it's fine if we go a minute or two over. Anybody else wants to share? But if not, oh yeah, Patty, that looks great. Yeah, look at that texture on that fur. That's awesome. Oh, and Diana. Oh my goodness. Yes, let's spotlight Diana. It's gorgeous, Patty. Thank you. I'm so excited about all these different pets. Here, let's spotlight Diana. I see.
I'm trying to flip through as quickly as I can. Sorry about that.
Look at that. That looks so great. Yes. Oh, that texture on the fur is just gorgeous. Oh, I'm so impressed. I love it. I love that so many and the tongue hanging out. Oh, the personality for days in that one. I love it. All right, I think that's it. I don't see anybody else holding one up. Oh, Diana's like, that's enough. I was trying to find myself and I didn't get back there.
I can't find you either.
I
There you are. It's all mixed up out of my
Okay.
phone.
All right. Thank you, Rich. Thank you all so much. What a great class. Don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, make it with Michael's or Michael's classes, and I'll see you back here next week, Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central Time, and we'll finish these. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Y'all are awesome. See you next time.